David Letterman was halfway through his opening monologue when he noticed something unusual. Seated in the third row between a college student and a middle-aged couple sat a man who looked like he didn't want to be there. Not in the usual nervous contestant way, but in a way that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. The man was in his early 70s, wearing a brown cardigan that had seen better days, slacks pressed with military precision, and a face that carried the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. His hands rested in his lap, motionless. While everyone around him laughed at David's joke about the mayor's latest scandal, this man simply stared at the stage with hollow eyes. David noticed. He always noticed. It was Thursday, November 12, 2015, at the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York City. The Late Show was in its 22nd year, and David Letterman had mastered the rhythm of live television. He knew when to pause for laughs, when to speed up the pace, and when to veer off script for something more interesting than what was written on his cards. This was one of those moments. After the monologue, David walked to his desk, adjusted his tie, and looked directly at the man in the brown cardigan. "Folks, we're going to do something a little different tonight," David announced. The audience quieted immediately. They could sense the shift in energy. "Sir, in the brown sweater, third row, would you mind standing up for me?" The man looked around, confused, hoping David meant someone else. But the spotlight operator had already found him, and 200 faces turned in his direction. Slowly, reluctantly, the man stood. He was tall, maybe 6'2", but he stood with the posture of someone carrying invisible weight. "What's your name, sir?" David asked gently. "Harold Patterson." His voice was quiet but steady, the voice of someone who'd spent a lifetime teaching others to speak up. "Harold, I noticed something about you during my monologue. Everyone in this theater was laughing except you. Not because my jokes weren't funny, let's be honest, they were hilarious, but because you looked like you were somewhere else entirely. Am I right?" Harold nodded slowly. The audience was dead silent now. "Where were you, Harold? Where was your mind just now?" Harold opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, it seemed like he wouldn't speak at all. Then, barely above a whisper, "I was trying to remember the last time I was happy." The weight of those words settled over the studio like snow. David set down his note cards. The band members, who'd been idly adjusting their instruments during the break, stopped moving. Even Paul Schaffer, who'd seen thousands of shows, looked up with concern. "And did you remember?" David asked softly, stepping out from behind his desk. Harold shook his head. "No, sir, I couldn't." What the audience didn't know, what nobody could see, was that Harold Patterson had been a man of routine and purpose for 72 years. He'd taught elementary school for 43 years, married his college sweetheart, raised 2 sons, and watched with pride as they gave him 7 grandchildren. He'd been the kind of man who remembered birthdays, never missed a recital, and could fix anything with duct tape and determination. Then, 2 years ago, his wife Margaret died. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral, and Harold stopped living. Oh, his body kept going through the motions. He woke up, made coffee, went through Margaret's recipe box, looking for meals he could manage alone. But the man who'd once whistled while grading papers and told terrible jokes at dinner had disappeared. His sons tried to help. They called every day. They invited him to holiday dinners. They brought the grandchildren by on weekends. But Harold had built a wall between himself and the world, and he didn't know how to tear it down. The grandchildren wrote him letters, 7 children ages 6 to 14, taking turns writing about school plays and soccer games and lost teeth. Every week, a new stack of envelopes arrived in Harold's mailbox, each one decorated with stickers and crayon drawings. Harold couldn't open them. Not wouldn't, couldn't. Each envelope felt like a weight, a reminder that life was continuing without Margaret, and he didn't know how to participate in it. So the letters piled up on his kitchen table, unopened, a mountain of love he couldn't bring himself to receive. Tonight, he'd come to the Late Show because his younger son, Michael, had purchased the tickets 6 months ago as a birthday gift. "You and Mom always wanted to see it live," Michael had said, unaware that his father no longer wanted anything. Harold had almost canceled. But something, guilt, obligation, some fading ember of his former self, had pushed him out the door and into the city. Now he stood in the spotlight, wishing he'd stayed home. David walked to the edge of the stage, close enough that their conversation felt private despite the cameras. "Harold, how did you get here tonight? To this theater?" "My son Michael brought me. He's backstage. He works for the show. Production assistant." Harold's voice cracked slightly with pride that surprised even him. "Michael Patterson." David turned to his stage manager. "Is Michael here?" A young man in his 30s appeared from the wings, looking concerned and confused. "Mr. Letterman?" "Come here, Michael." David gestured him forward. "Stand with your dad." Michael walked into the audience section and stood beside Harold, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. The gesture was protective, loving, worried. David looked at them both. "Michael, your father just told us he can't remember the last time he was happy. Did you know that?" Michael's face crumpled. I knew he was struggling since Mom died, but I didn't know it was that bad." "Harold," David continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine concern. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. When's the last time you felt connected to your family? Not obligated, not guilty, but genuinely connected?" Harold thought for a long time. The silence stretched so long that the audience began to shift uncomfortably. Finally, he spoke. "The day before my wife's funeral, all 7 grandchildren came into our bedroom where she was resting. They climbed onto the bed and sang her favorite song, 'You Are My Sunshine.' She smiled. It was the last smile I ever saw on her face." David's own eyes were glistening now. "That's a beautiful memory, Harold. What happened after that?" "I stopped letting them in." Harold's voice broke completely. "They write me letters every week. Beautiful letters about their lives. And I can't open them. They're sitting on my kitchen table right now, dozens of them, unopened." The audience gasped audibly. Several people were crying openly. "Why can't you open them?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already understood. "Because if I open them, if I read about their lives continuing without her, it means she's really gone. It means I have to keep living in a world where she doesn't exist, and I don't know how to do that." Michael was crying now, his hand still on his father's shoulder. "Dad, we need you. The kids ask about you constantly. They think you don't love them anymore." Harold's knees nearly buckled. "What? No. I love them more than my own life." "Then why won't you read their letters?" Michael's voice was plaintive, desperate. Harold looked at his son, then at David, then out at the audience of strangers who were witnessing his complete breakdown. "Because I'm afraid if I start feeling again, I'll have to feel all the pain too, and I don't think I can survive it." David did something then that nobody expected. He walked down the steps from the stage, into the audience section, and stood directly in front of Harold. He placed both hands on the older man's shoulders and looked him in the eye. "Harold, I lost my father when I was young. Different circumstances, but the same kind of hole in the world. And I'll tell you what someone told me. You're not honoring Margaret's memory by stopping your life. You're dishonoring it. She didn't love you so that you could stop living. She loved you so that you would know how." Harold's face crumpled completely. 72 years of stoic masculinity shattered in front of 200 people and millions of eventual viewers. He sobbed like a child, and David held him up. The audience sat in stunned silence. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was witnessing something sacred, something raw and true that television rarely captured. When Harold's breathing steadied, David stepped back but kept one hand on his arm. "Michael, do you have any of those letters here?" Michael shook his head. "No, but I can call my wife. She's at Dad's house right now, helping him organize. She could bring them." David turned to his producer in the booth. "How much time do we have before we need to wrap?" "We can extend," came the response through his earpiece, "as long as you need." David smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a different kind of commercial break. A long one. And when we come back, something special is going to happen." During the break, the theater remained silent. Nobody left their seats. Harold sat back down, Michael beside him, both men quietly talking. David returned to his desk but didn't review his notes. He simply waited. 28 minutes later, an eternity in television time, Michael's wife Rebecca arrived with a shopping bag full of letters. She rushed into the theater, her eyes red from crying. Michael had called her during the break and explained everything. When the show returned from commercial, David was seated at his desk. Harold remained in the audience, Michael and Rebecca on either side of him. The shopping bag sat at his feet. "Harold," David began, "those letters have been waiting for you, but I think maybe they've been waiting for the right moment. Would you be willing to open one? Right here, right now?" Harold looked at the bag like it contained explosives. His hands trembled. "I don't know if I can." "You don't have to do it alone," David said. "Michael, would you help your father?" Michael reached into the bag and pulled out an envelope at random. It was pink, decorated with flower stickers and a crayon drawing of a rainbow. The return address showed it was from Emma, Harold's youngest grandchild, age 7. "This one's from Emma," Michael said softly. "Your little sunshine." Harold took the envelope with shaking hands. He held it for a long moment, feeling its weight, tracing his granddaughter's careful handwriting with one finger. Then, with Michael's hand on his shoulder and 200 people holding their collective breath, Harold opened the letter. His lips moved silently as he read. Tears streamed down his face, but his expression began to change. The hollow grief was still there, but something else was creeping in. Something that looked almost like a smile. "Would you share it with us, Harold?" David asked gently. "Only if you want to." Harold nodded. His voice was thick with emotion, but he read aloud. "Dear Grandpa, I hope you are okay. Mommy says you are sad because Grandma is in heaven. I am sad too. But I want to tell you something. In art class, we learned about butterflies. Did you know that butterflies can't fly if they're too cold? They need sunshine to warm up their wings. I think you are like a butterfly right now. You are too cold and sad to fly. But Grandpa, I am your sunshine. Me and Sophie and Jake and all of us. We can warm you up if you let us. Please, let us warm you up. I miss you so much. Love, Emma. P.S. I got an A on my butterfly report. You would be proud." The silence that followed was absolute. Then somewhere in the back of the theater, someone began to clap. It was soft at first, then others joined. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding not for entertainment, but for courage, for love, for the breaking open of a heart that had been closed too long. Harold clutched the letter to his chest and wept openly. These weren't the desperate, drowning sobs from before. These were different. These were healing. David walked back down to the audience. "Harold, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to really hear me. Your grandchildren don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to be over your grief. They just need you to be present. They need their grandpa, exactly as you are right now, broken and hurting and trying." Harold looked up at David. "What if I'm not enough? What if I can't be the grandpa I was before?" "Then be the grandpa you are now. Let them see that grief is real, that loss is hard, but that love is stronger than both. That's the greatest lesson you could ever teach them." Michael spoke up, his voice thick. "Dad, we don't need you to be who you were. We just need you to be here, with us. Messy and sad and imperfect, just here." David returned to his desk and picked up the shopping bag of letters. "Harold, there are dozens more of these, each one a small piece of sunshine. Each one your grandchildren reaching out, telling you they're here, they're waiting, they're ready to warm you up whenever you're ready to let them." He held up the bag. "What do you say we make sure you get these home safely? And maybe, just maybe, you could open one each day? Not all at once, one piece of sunshine at a time?" Harold nodded slowly. "One at a time. I think I can do that." David smiled, and it was genuine, warm, completely void of showmanship. "Michael, your dad's going to need support. Can you commit to that?" "Every day," Michael said without hesitation. "Whatever he needs." "Rebecca?" David addressed Michael's wife. "We're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "We're family. That means we show up." David looked directly into the camera. "Folks, I want to say something to everyone watching at home. If you have someone in your life who's pulled away, who's closed themselves off after loss or pain, please don't give up on them. Keep sending the letters, keep making the calls, keep showing up. Because someday, they might be ready to open that first envelope. And when they do, you want to make sure there's something there waiting for them." He turned back to Harold. "Sir, you came here tonight thinking you couldn't remember the last time you were happy. But I'll tell you something. Right now, in this moment, you're surrounded by people who love you. You're holding a letter from a little girl who thinks you're a butterfly who needs sunshine, and you're taking the first step toward letting yourself feel again. If that's not a moment worth remembering, I don't know what is." Harold stood up, still clutching Emma's letter. He looked at David with clear eyes for the first time that evening. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough." "You don't thank me," David said. "You thank them." He gestured to Michael and Rebecca. "And then you go home, and tomorrow morning you open another letter, and the next day another one, and you let your grandchildren warm you back up, one day at a time." As the show moved toward its conclusion, David did something unprecedented. He invited Harold, Michael, and Rebecca to stay on stage. The band played, but softly, atmospherically. David didn't do his usual closing routine. Instead, he simply stood there with Harold's family, a silent acknowledgement that some moments transcended entertainment. When the show finally ended and the audience filtered out, many stopped to hug Harold or shake his hand. Old women told him about their own losses. Young parents thanked him for showing them what grief really looked like. A teenager told him that her grandfather had stopped talking to the family, and now she understood why. Harold received each person with quiet grace, still clutching Emma's letter like a lifeline. 3 months after the episode aired, Harold Patterson sent a letter to The Late Show. In it, he explained that he'd opened every single letter from his grandchildren. Some had made him laugh, many had made him cry. All of them had reminded him that Margaret wouldn't want him to stop living, she'd want him to love harder, deeper, more courageously. He'd started having Sunday dinners with all 7 grandchildren. They'd created a new tradition. Each week, one child would share a memory of Grandma Margaret, and Harold would tell them a story they'd never heard. The grief was still there, but now it had company. Joy, laughter, connection, love. Harold had also started a support group at his local community center for widows and widowers over 65. He called it the Unopened Letters Project, and its mission was simple: helping people reconnect with life after loss. In the first 6 months, 43 people joined. Each one brought their own version of unopened letters, literal or metaphorical, and together they learned to open them. The episode became one of the most watched moments in late show history, shared millions of times across social media with captions like, "This is what television should be," and "David Letterman reminds us what matters." But for Harold Patterson, the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd learned to be cold no more. He'd let his grandchildren warm him back up, one letter at a time, one Sunday dinner at a time, one painful, beautiful day at a time. And Emma? She never stopped writing letters, but now every single one got a response. Sometimes Harold wrote back, sometimes he called and read her letter aloud, telling her exactly which parts made him smile. Sometimes he showed up at her school unannounced, just to give her a hug, because he'd learned what David Letterman had. Tried to tell him that November night, grief and love aren't opposites, they're partners, and the only way to honor the people we've lost is to keep loving the people we still have. David never forgot Harold Patterson. Years later, when he retired from The Late Show, he mentioned that night in his final monologue. "Television is supposed to entertain," he said, "but every once in a while, if we're lucky and brave enough to let real life interrupt the script, it can do something more important. It can remind us we're not alone. It can hold up a mirror to our pain and say, this is human, this is real, and this is survivable." Harold Patterson watched that final episode from his living room, surrounded by all 7 grandchildren, Michael and Rebecca, his older son's family, and a stack of letters he'd saved from each child. When David signed off for the last time, Harold stood and raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. "To butterflies," he said softly. "And sunshine," Emma added, snuggling closer to her grandfather. That night, Harold opened one more letter before bed. It was from Emma, written 3 years after the Late Show appearance. In it, she told him about a science project on monarch butterflies and their annual migration. She'd learned that monarchs travel thousands of miles through storms and wind and darkness, always searching for warmth. "Grandpa," she'd written in her improving handwriting, "you migrated back to us. You flew through the storm and found your way home. And now you're here, warm and alive and ours again. I'm so glad you didn't give up." Harold folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where he kept all the others. Then he looked at the photograph on his nightstand, Margaret smiling at some long-ago family gathering, her eyes full of life and love. "I didn't give up," he whispered to her, because you taught me how to love them, and they taught me how to let them love me back. In the darkness of his bedroom, Harold Patterson finally allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 2 years, grateful. Grateful for the pain, because it meant the love had been real. Grateful for the letters, because they'd been his way back. Grateful for a late-night talk show host who'd seen a broken man in a brown cardigan and decided that entertainment could wait. Grateful for grandchildren who'd never stopped reaching out, even when he couldn't reach back. And most of all, grateful that even butterflies who've forgotten how to fly can be warmed back to life by the persistent, patient sunshine of unconditional love. The late show moment lasted 15 minutes. The healing it sparked lasted the rest of Harold Patterson's life. And somewhere, in heaven, or memory, or the space between heartbeats, Margaret smiled, because her butterfly had finally learned to fly again.